I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the verdict is in for a San Diego man who ran a revenge porn website. It's out with an old gas station to make room for a new fire station in an underserved San Diego neighborhood.
Researchers find abused and neglected children risk further harm due to a lack of enforcement of child protective laws. I'm Peggy Pico with what needs to be done to fix the problem. And a Citizen Stadium advisory member shares details on plans and financing a new Charger stadium and how this committee might be different than others.
And the graying of the golf crowd is putting some local courses in danger of shutting down. We'll look at what they're doing to attract younger players. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The jury reached a verdict today in the trial of a San Diego man who ran a revenge porn website. Here with details, KPBS technology reporter David Wagner. David, what exactly did the jury decide?
After more than 2 days of deliberation, they found Kevin Bollert guilty on multiple counts of identity theft and extortion. The charges all stem from a website he ran where nude photos were posted without the consent of the people pictured. The jury was unable to reach a verdict on a charge of conspiracy and on one count of identity theft. But the guilty verdicts are significant because Bollert was one of the first website operators to face criminal charges over revenge porn.
And remind us what revenge porn is.
So when we're talking about revenge porn, we're mostly talking about nude photos of someone posted online without their permission. Often in these photos, women, they share these photos with a significant other, assuming they'd be kept private. According to evidence presented at trial, Bollert earned at least $30,000 running a site featuring thousands of these kinds of photos. And the prosecution argued that posting these photos on his website constituted an illegal use of personally identifying information, or put another way, identity theft. Bollert was charged with extortion because he ran a second website where victims had to pay him hundreds of dollars to have these photos taken down.
And what does this mean for future cases?
Well, it means that revenge porn purveyors may no longer be able to hide behind legal protections designed for online services that rely on third-party content. This trial really hinged on whether Bollert actively trafficked in illegal content or if he was merely running an online service where other people broke the law. The prosecutor said Bollert designed his site to obtain photos illegally and use them to extort victims, but the defense said he should be granted the same legal immunity as larger websites like Google and Facebook. You know, they're typically not legally charged when third parties use their services to make threats or post defamatory content. The jury obviously disagreed and decided revenge porn website operators can be held liable for the content on their sites.
KPBS technology reporter David Wagner. Inmate populations in county jails have dipped since voters passed Prop 47 last November. The measure changed some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. San Diego County's jail population was more than 5,600 before the law passed and dropped by nearly 1,000 inmates to just shy of 4,800. A new report from researchers at UC San Diego says abused and neglected children in the county are vulnerable to further harm because of failures by the federal government. Peggy Pico has the details.
Shame on U.S. is the title of the report by the University of San Diego's Children's Advocacy Institute. The report reveals child welfare laws are not being appropriately enforced by all three government branches, which puts abused and neglected children at further risk of harm. Joining me with details on how to fix this problem is my guest, Christina Reel, Senior Staff Attorney with the Children's Advocacy Institute. And Christina, was there a particular case or trend that got your institute and your group interested in doing this report?
Well, yes, we were looking at outcomes and what was happening to kids in care, and we saw that there were a lot of cases that had been brought to really help kids in care across the state and across the country. And then we started noticing that it was the same issues being brought up again and again. And so we wanted to look a little deeper. Why is that? We do have these federal requirements in place. Why aren't states meeting those standards?
Highlight some of the key concerns and issues that you found were trends.
We were really concerned with social workers not visiting children regularly, with children not having attorneys when they should have attorneys. And kids that were moving from place to place and hadn't found that stable family home for them to live in.
Were you able to find or have some examples of how this actually impacted or affected the children that either didn't have the attorneys or that were being kind of lost?
Well, one issue that happens here in San Diego is that when children act out in a group home, they might end up going to juvenile hall, and they bounce around between juvenile hall and Polinsky because there's no family willing to take these kids back in. When had maybe whatever they did, maybe they threw a shoe across the room. Well, that's assault, could be assault with a deadly weapon in foster care. But if that had happened in their family's home, it really would have been nothing but, hey, go to your room for a bit.
So there are laws in California and, of course, in every single state that are child protection laws. What's supposed to happen if those aren't in compliance, if a social worker isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing?
If states aren't meeting their standards, for example, social workers aren't going out as often as they should, then the federal government is supposed to be withholding funds from the state until the state can come into compliance.
Child welfare agencies have a long history of saying, listen, we're underfunded, we're understaffed, we don't have enough flexibility on how we can use the money that we do get. What's your take on these issues?
We actually agree with them. And so our position isn't, hey, federal government, we want you to cut off all federal funding. But if you're not making the threats, then the local county and state agencies aren't going to find these children as their priority population and properly fund them. So we think that the threat of withdrawing federal funding needs to be the appropriate hammer to get states and counties to properly prioritize these children so that they won't lose the federal funding that's available.
And that makes sense. There's a consequence. But what about getting more funding if they indeed are underfunded?
We think that if there was a real threat at the federal level, then they would get more funding within the county and state budgets. There are funds out there. It's just a matter of where those funds go, and these children aren't necessarily the popular place to place those funds.
What happens to kids who fall through the cracks? I know you mentioned juvenile hall. Were you able to find the data on that? Do they trickle out of the system? What happens?
Well, kids who fall through the cracks it happens all over the place. We have kids that aren't attaining their high school education. They're not graduating from college at near the rate of the average population. These children lose ties to their families. One of these federal requirements is that family ties are maintained and family continuity. These kids have no family safety net, they have no longevity in placement, and they end up really lost as they're exiting.
Well, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services hasn't commented on this report. Has anybody else commented, or are you getting reactions?
We're getting reactions from other advocates, mostly very supportive and saying we see that this is happening, we know it's a problem, and we're glad someone is finally saying something and calling out the issues that these kids are neglected at every level.
You also brought this report to some staff members of Congress. What would you like to see happen next?
We would like to see some changes in the laws. We'd like to see some timelines put in, some requirements that Health and Human Services actually act within an appropriate amount of time, and that if Health and Human Services doesn't act, we would like to see a private right of enforcement inserted so that private citizens can say, we see these children being neglected, or I as a child have been neglected, and I want to require that my state meet the federal standards in order to receive these federal funds.
All right, Christina Reel, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks so much for having me.
The White House is pushing back its target dates for ending homelessness. The new goals are 1 year later than originally planned. The new targets: getting all veterans off the streets by the end of 2016 and ending chronic homelessness in the general public by 2017. Housing officials say they have made progress on both goals, but are extending the timelines because of budget constraints. One of San Diego's top agencies to help the homeless has a new leader tonight. Deacon Jimmy Vargas has been named president and CEO of Father Joe's Villages. Previously, he was a vice president at Copley Press. Transportation is crucial to getting around San Diego County. Now, a new program will make it easier for ex-offenders to use refurbished bikes to get to work and other reentry programs. Now, the bikes are refurbished by inmates from Donovan Correctional Facility, then made available to help ex-offenders transition back into society. Most of the bikes were donated or confiscated by law enforcement. Corey Perez and Veronica Madrano are going through the parolee education program. They received the first 2 bikes.
It's pretty difficult in a program like this. It's very valuable, for life skills and also, teach you maybe a trade or so. Thank you guys.
I have been doing time, and it's just exciting that they're giving back to us something that it just helps us through life.
The pedal program was paid for through a grant made possible by the district attorney's office. The DA says successful reentry for ex-offenders is vital to keeping our streets safe and improving their chances of success. Skyline Hills is getting its first fire station. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler tells us the community has needed one for decades.
Tearing down the old to make way. The abandoned gas station on the corner of Skyline Drive and Sycar Road has been an eyesore in this community for years. But by April, officials say there will be a temporary mobile fire station here. While City Hall works on how to pay for the permanent one. Fire Chief Javier Maynard says this neighborhood has been in need for decades.
Early on in my career, in the early 1980s, I served adjacent to Lincoln High School at Fire Station 12. And I remember the responses down Skyline to get out here seemingly took forever.
Councilmember Myrtle Cole says much of her district lacks access to all kinds of things other districts take for granted.
No, this community, as you stated, has been underserved. We don't have the restaurants we need. We don't have the grocery stores. We don't have the jobs that we need in this district. Why? I don't know.
For Cole, this fire station is one of many projects she'd like to get off the ground. Mayor Kevin Faulkner says he's right there with Cole.
It starts with a focus that as we see increased revenues coming, as we see some of the reform dollars coming, where do we prioritize those dollars? My commitment has been that we put them right into neighborhoods, and particularly those neighborhoods that have not received their fair share of city funding.
This location is one of 4 in Cole's district in need of a fire station. It was picked because the city owns the land where the abandoned gas station used to stand. Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
Efforts to end the state's ban on plastic bags continue. California made history last year by becoming the first state in the country to ban plastic bags at grocery stores. One effort is new legislation calling for a repeal of the plastic bag ban. And the other is a bill calling to repeal a 10-cent fee on paper bags, which is part of the new law. Supporters say government should not get involved.
Between encouraging people to do something and then compelling them to do so with the force of government. And that's the big difference between what's happening with the legislation and what's been happening in our culture. You go to Trader Joe's, do they offer plastic bag? No. Do you go to Whole Foods, they offer plastic bag? No. Do you go to Costco, do they offer plastic bag? No. My thing is that retailers should be able to make the decision themselves.
There's also a referendum effort to repeal the ban. Proponents say Harper's bill cannot be taken up while the referendum is pending. The ban is set to go into effect in July. Department of Energy is trying to figure out why there are so many apartment and condo complexes without solar power systems. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson is here to tell us about a San Diego group's plan to help out. Eric, who's involved in this project?
Well, Dwayne, the Center for Sustainable Energy is a San Diego-based group that has long encouraged alternative green energy options for state residents. And the organization has landed a $700,000 grant from the Department of Energy to find out why there's not as much solar on multifamily complexes like apartments or condos. They're crafting a 3-year plan to see if they can identify the specific roadblocks and then offer some solutions. The findings of their study could inform solar policy around the rest of the nation.
Is the lack of solar on multifamily complexes a problem in San Diego?
Yeah, it is. KPBS actually looked into this situation late last year and found there is a significantly higher rate of solar adoption by single-family homeowners or businesses that own their own offices. State officials initially thought that the problem was that residents in complexes think it's too hard to split up the benefits of a shared solar array, so they passed a rule to make that easier, but that didn't increase the number of systems. Other things that worked against the installation of solar panels include a lack of space in some complexes and significant upfront costs.
KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. A federal judge is asking for changes to a proposed settlement involving thousands of concussion lawsuits filed against the NFL. The current plan would pay out $1 billion over 65 years, but the judge wants changes so the settlement will benefit more retired players. Some players and their families have already opted out of the settlement, including the family of former Charger Junior Seau. He was found to have suffered concussion-related brain disease after he committed suicide in 2012. You may have heard over the weekend Seau was voted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This was his first year of eligibility. The induction ceremony will be held in August. Where might a new stadium for the Chargers be? Will voters get a say? And who could wind up paying for it? Those are just a few questions Peggy Pico is asking members of the new Stadium Advisory Group.
San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer appointed 9 people he describes as civic, business, and community leaders. Joining me is a member of the Stadium Advisory Group, Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, Amy Fawcett. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Amy, Mayor Faulconer had tasked this group that you're on to come up with, quote, a tangible plan where San Diegans could feel and, quote, kick the tires of it. So specifically, what are some of the tasks that he has asked your group to do?
First and foremost, we need to look at the 2 different locations, and that is the Mission Valley Qualcomm site as well as the downtown site. Those are 2 that have been talked about the most over the last several years. And then also to come up with a recommendation on a financing plan for one of those sites.
So those will be the only 2 sites and also a financing plan.
Correct.
I see. The issue of a new Charger Stadium has been going on for the last 13 years. So, and there's been other groups that have been tasked with this sort of, come up with a plan. Do you think you'll meet the fall deadline? And if so, how is this one different?
I am optimistic that we can meet that deadline. As you pointed out, it has been talked about and various locations have been looked at and financing plans over the last 13 years. Also, the political environment today, the city's finances are in really good shape than they have ever been in the last 10 years. And this gives Mayor Faulconer and his team an opportunity to really take a look at this issue and make it a priority.
Now, during Mayor Faulconer's campaign, he said no tax dollars would be spent and no city land would be sold to build a new stadium. Do you have specific guidelines as for the financing plans? Are those 2 things off the table?
No specific guidelines have been provided by the mayor relating to the finances.
And so any ideas if those might still be on the table?
I think everything at this point is on the table. Again, we haven't had an opportunity to have any criteria or guidelines. But I would think that we need to look at everything in order to come up with a plan that'll work for the taxpayers and the Chargers.
No, I understand that the advisory committee, your group meetings aren't going to be public and they're not open to the press as well. Do you know why that is?
I understand that, as Mayor Faulconer pointed out last week, that all the documents and documentation that the group reviews will be made public. Also, he's created an email address that the public can provide their input to, as well as an opportunity that the recommendations that the committee brings forward will be provided with backup to the public, and they'll have an opportunity to chew it over.
Look at the documents after the fact. Will the NFL commissioner or the Chargers management be involved in the development of your plans or your recommendations as a group?
My understanding this group is to be independent, so no stakeholder or interest in the project would be a part of it. However, the Chargers, through Mark Fabiani's as the spokesperson, last week did say that he would make available all the different options that have been looked at over the years to the group for review.
And this just doesn't involve the Chargers, right? The stadium, as I understand, is also for other groups, including the Aztecs, that might be playing there, correct?
Absolutely. And the Aztecs, San Diego State Aztecs has a great interest in this project. They too need a new stadium as well, and they are a great asset to our community that we need to look at.
So it sounds like a lot of moving parts here. Now, this isn't an official city commission, and each member is actually volunteering their own time. How often will these advisory meetings happen? Do you know, and when will the first one be?
We are not sure. We're trying to set the first one with 9 people and trying to get all their schedules. It is a task, a heavy task. I don't know exactly how often we'll meet, but we'll meet as often as possible to make sure that we come up with a tangible recommendation that can meet the mayor's deadline of fall.
Any ideas of how that's going to work out? Will people be assigned to different things? You know, people
that's
who
all yet
might.
To be
it's
determined.
all to be
it's
determined.
All to be determined still.
So, volunteer, not an official group. Why did you want to be on this advisory committee?
Well, our focus, we were honored to be asked. I was honored to be asked as a representative of the San Diego Regional Chamber so that we can have the perspective of jobs and businesses. This does have an effect on the economy, and we're very honored to be able to be at that table and provide that perspective.
Well, I want to let folks know there's a complete list of the Stadium Advisory Committee group, their names and bios on our website. They can follow the link at kpbs.org. Amy Fawcett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And a quick update late today, City Attorney Jan Goldsmith issued a statement about the legal role of that advisory committee. He says it does not have to hold public meetings because it's an advisory committee only and has no authority to make decisions for the city.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, we sit down with the director of the critically acclaimed Oscar-nominated movie Boyhood. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Farmers Insurance Golf Tournament tees off this week at Torrey Pines. Golf course managers hope it will boost enthusiasm for the game. KPBS North County editor Allison St. John says golf is facing a crisis.
More than 1 million golfers in the United States gave up the game in 2014, and golf courses are trying new tricks to lure players back to the greens, including 15-inch holes.
It's just a lot easier to get the ball in the hole. You just whack it. Yeah.
Lloyd Porter is head golf pro at the Oaks North Golf Course in Rancho Bernardo.
Look at that, look at that. All right, absolutely.
Where rather than the traditional 18 holes, the course is divided into 3 9-hole courses.
It's something that's going across the country now to try to make golf easier and faster to play and to attract more new golfers.
In today's busy world, it's easier to find 3 hours to play 9 holes than 5 hours or more to play a championship course. John McNair, president of Southern California's PGA, says the biggest decline is in golfers in their 20s and 30s.
On a national stat, just, back about 13 years ago, about just shy of 12% of the population golfed. Today, it's about 8.8% of the population golf.
Heading to the golf course first thing in the morning and reappearing again long after lunch just doesn't cut it anymore for today's fathers, McNair says.
The role of the male in the family, the father figure, they're going to soccer games and doing more things with their children, which is a great thing. What we'd like to do, though, is try to get more of those people out to play golf.
McNair says even the draw of big names doesn't do the trick. The so-called Tiger effect is limited.
It really didn't grow golfers that much. It grew people watching golf on TV, and it was great for TV ratings, great for the purses of the PGA Tour pros, but it did not have the same effect for the number of people actually getting out to play golf.
I'm standing on one of 2 golf courses that had to close down in San Diego's North County just in the last couple of years. The San Luis Rey course was built in the 1960s, and it thrived as a golf resort for decades before it had to close down last year because it was losing money.
Escondido's former country club also shut down. Its greens have turned brown.
A glut of golf courses was built in the 1990s with the expectation that demand would increase from retiring baby boomers. But now, 20 years later, the popularity of golf is decreasing and the costs, especially of water to keep the greens green, is increasing.
It's a tough time for the industry, it really is.
Chris Heyman manages the championship course at Rancho Bernardo Inn. As a survival strategy, his course invested almost $2 million recently in a state-of-the-art sprinkler system to cut down on water bills.
We have several ways of controlling that via our radios, our cell phones, or even our iPad. And we can control any sprinkler head on the golf course remotely from anywhere in the world.
And to keep the grass green in the cold season,
we've gotten away from overseeding and gone to painting our fairways, as a lot of courses in San Diego County have done. A good example would be our first fairway here at Rancho Bernardo Inn. We you can't tell it, but that's a painted fairway.
Other golf courses have resorted to different strategies. Rancho Santa Fe, for example, took advantage of $1.6 million in rebates from the Metropolitan Water District to replace 18 acres of turf and pull up 84 trees.
Good job! Excellent!
But to keep the number of players from drying up, the PGA is starting off the next generation early.
Oh, good job! Okay, you gotta make 3 to move back to the 7.
I liked it. It was really fun. And I got to putt, and that was kind of fun.
One of the things that we always do whenever we leave golf is shake hands. Good job, man.
Calvin Holzenbach, aged 7, is already learning the finer points of golf sportsmanship after school. McNair says retiring baby boomers are keeping the game alive right now, and that's not a comforting thought.
My biggest concern is if you fast forward 10, 20 years from now, when that demographic that isn't playing as much and has dropped quite a bit in the last decade, and the boomers aren't playing as much golf anymore or golf at all, that's when the big challenge could be coming about.
The Escondido course and San Luis Rey Downs are not the only ones that have succumbed to bankruptcy recently. Some courses are bought up and revitalized, but McNair thinks that won't solve the long-term problems.
We need more golf courses to close in order for the ones that are left to survive.
He predicts 3 more golf courses in San Diego will close soon, though he won't say which ones. Alison St. John, KPBS News.
KPBS video journalist Katie Shulov helped produce that story. The Farmers Insurance Open starts Thursday, and in fact, it may be a little overcast when the tournament begins. Upper 60s to low 70s along the coast for the next few days. Low to mid 70s for the inland valleys with a mix of sun and clouds. 60s in the mountains with plenty of sunshine, and low 80s for the desert. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition.